Herzlich willkommen an.
Welcome tonight from Berlin for the event Afrika First. Nice to see that you're locked in, and I'm happy to welcome you here to spend this evening together virtually. And I'm Anna Fleischhauer. I'd like to welcome you cordially from the Berlin factory at the Görlitzer Park, and I would like to moderate this wonderful evening. We have 1.5 hours with a great program. Africa First, that's the title of our event today, Africa First. America First, of course, some of us may have some connotations which might sound negative. America, number one, then nothing for quite some time, but Africa First starts at a completely different point. We have to understand Africa First completely globally. So we as Europeans and the entire world, if we don't start with Africa and to invest in Africa and to take a look at and perspective of the continent, then we are going to feel the effects. Now tonight we're going to focus on the continent of Africa. We'd like to understand the connection between Europe and Africa. We want to understand the challenges and also the chances the continent offers, and to what extent an improved infrastructure, more favorable financing, and a more global standard would be able to reduce the poverty. Tonight, the next 1.5 hours, we have roughly 2 parts, so to speak. In the first part, we're going to hear several speakers on stage who have private and professional connections to Africa. And in our second part, we're going to talk about Africa First by way of the book presentation of Martin Schönwitz and Daniel Schönwitz and Martin Schöller. And now, today it's not enough if a writer and 2 authors have a good idea and put this on paper, but it also requires a publisher who believes in this idea, who supports the authors. Now these two, with Günter Berg and Peter Feierabend, they found 2 publishers who are supporting these authors. Günter Berg used to be the publisher of Surkamp and Insel for many years, and he worked as managing director of Hoffmann and Campe for many years until last year he opened his own publishing house. Now in this publishing house, Africa First is going to be published. Welcome him on the stage, Günter Berg. Thank you very much. Book premieres, it's always something special. And I hope this book premiere is even more special if authors and, for quite some time have worked on a manuscript and have, corrected it and improved it. And at the end, they're holding a hand. You might believe, okay, the work is done. So Daniel Schönwitz's and Martin Schöller's book, that's different. This is going to be, an initiative and creating an initiative that goes beyond the ideas of this book. This book is a roadmap for what you just mentioned, Mrs. Fleischhauer, which reminds us of the responsibility of liberal democracies, of civilized, Western countries, and, recollection on the countries that need our expertise and experience and the ideas of economy and social market economy, but who also need our money. And I think that's exactly what Martin Schöller wanted to discuss with that book. And the publishing house is really proud of being able to publish such a book, and also to go on with that movement that is probably newly triggered by this book. And that's why thank you very much to the 2 authors, Martin Schöller and Daniel Schönwitz, are going to see tonight the experts that are going to come in order to explain why Africa First actually is truly so important. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Günter Berg. You talked about the roadmap before, the roadmap to Africa. On this road, we're going to move forward now. And I'm going to introduce the first speaker. You all will know him, and he sent us a video message. 10 years He was the Premier Minister, the face of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and he served 3 terms of offices. In 2016, he founded the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change with a target to make globalization not only happening with a few, but also being received by many. Currently, he is, working on the improvement of the health service in Africa. That means any vaccinated person in Africa would get an electronic patient file that is being stored in a cloud. And this will also help to, get control of the corona pandemic. So I really look forward to hear him by a video message. Tony Blair.
It's a very timely event, coming as it does just a week after the international cooperation meetings between the Togo and German governments. So Africa is at a critical juncture. Its population is set to double over the next 30, 40 years. Over 2 billion people will be living on the continent of Africa in time to come. And it's got an urgent need for infrastructure, for all the things we take for granted in the West. It needs access to electricity. It needs the building of the infrastructure of roads and rail and ports. It needs also proper links to the outside world and connectivity through airlines and airports. So all of this infrastructure is going to have to be built over this coming period of time. And what we have at the same moment as this challenge is in front of us, we have an immense amount of liquid capital in the West. So interest rates are very low. Pension funds, for example, trying to look after the interests of their pensioners, find that traditional investment in government bonds, because interest rates are so low, is very, very difficult. So they're looking for investable and bankable projects. So part of the purpose of this conference is to say, how do we put together those with the money, and not just multilateral financial institutions and multilateral development banks, but also the private sector? How do we put those with the money together with the need for these projects and create a set of investable and bankable projects that allow Africa to have the development it needs? And Martin, whom I thank very much for inviting me and for helping put on this conference, points out that the requirements for Africa over the next decade will be around about €1 trillion in terms of its infrastructure. And that sounds a lot of money, and is a lot of money. But when you set it alongside what Western governments are spending to support their own economies at the moment, it puts it in context. And also, and this is the second point, if we do this in a smart way, this can actually earn a return. It can be a genuine investment. And so one of the things that's important is that the European Union and also the UK plays its part in how we can help mobilize this type of development resource, how we can use our aid much more effectively, how we can bring together public and private capital, and how we can de-risk some of these projects so that people are prepared to invest in them. So this is a really, really important thing, and it goes alongside the type of private sector investment we need to see in manufacturing and in agriculture and small businesses and in the burgeoning technology sector in Africa as well. But there's a final point that I want to emphasize, which is that we need, and this is what my institute works on, we need also the capability and capacity for the governments of Africa to be able to use this resource and investment effectively, and to create the right environment in terms of regulation, in terms of rule of law, in which these investments are going to be safer and much more capable of succeeding. So the final bit of this is to say that in this partnership, which is a genuine partnership for investment in Africa in the future, it's important that the governments play their part as well. And the work that my institute does in Togo and in around about 20 different countries in Africa is precisely to give government the capacity it needs and the institutional capability it needs in order to make the best use of the help that is given. So this is a very important moment. And I think, you know, the investment conference itself also illustrates something very important that's changed about Africa in these last years. And I want to emphasize this as a conclusion to my remarks. When I was Prime Minister, became Prime Minister almost a quarter of a century ago in the UK, these types of investment conferences were rare. The debates between Africa and Europe and the Western world were often debates about the past rather than about the future. And what I've learned through working in a country like Togo is how that narrative about Africa within Africa itself has changed. So I remember on my last trip to Togo, getting some sense of the varied history of Togo with both British, French, and German influence. One of the fascinating things to me was that there are still people in Togo today who speak German. And of course, now there are German lessons being given in order that this two-way dialogue between Togo and Germany can be improved. But I also saw uniquely, it was somewhat striking because of all the Brexit debates in the UK, a picture of a flag that was sewn together almost 100 years or more ago, part British flag, part French flag, and it symbolized the fact that the two countries at the time were fighting over Togo. And then you fast forward a century later, and you see the relationship today is a relationship of partners and equals, and it's a relationship in which both of us know we have something to gain. And Togo is an example of a country that has all the troubles of its past, but is determined to seize the opportunities of the future. And that new spirit in Africa has to call forth a new spirit from us in Europe. And that spirit is not simply about generosity, and it's certainly not about charity, but it's about recognizing there is a shared joint opportunity for the future if we're prepared to take it together. And that is, in the end, the single most exciting thing that's happening in Africa today. It's a continent that's growing. It's a continent that will become increasingly important for the world. And it's a continent in which countries like Germany and Europe as a whole and Britain can play a real part as partners of Africa for the future. Thank you very much and good luck with the conference.
Ganz herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much to Tony Blair for this truly great statement. I'm sure that we're going to get more content from that. I'd also like to welcome the next guest live on this stage. And from 2013 to 2017, he was vice president of the German Bundestag, Federal Parliament. Privately and by profession, he traveled a lot in Africa, particularly through Togo. And we're going to hear the ambassador of the Republic of Togo and welcome here on the stage. Singhammer speaks for a development cooperation on eye level. That means if the people in Africa are not doing fine, we won't be doing fine in the long run. So the new dimension of cooperation is economic cooperation, long-term investment, because only this way something can change in the long run. Now let me welcome to the stage Johannes Singhammer. Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be able to be here on the presentation for a book that deserves any kind of attention. You know, Africa is our neighbor continent of us Europeans, but it's not only our neighboring continent, but it's also, it's also our destiny. And that's what is, was just mentioned. because we are depending from each other, and we feel that with every month even more. And that's why it makes sense, to think about it as to how we can shape the cooperation with Africa and get it more intensive, and how we can accomplish it and do this on an honest eye level and get it more intensive.
Ein Buch vor.
And Martin Schöller presented a book and is going to present it with that name, Africa First. It's quite distinct, which means that relations are going to be quite different, which is good. So I'm delighted to see that with this, the debate, the discussion is, started as to how we can open a new chapter in the cooperation with Africa. We also know that our resources are limited. We also know that we need to do more. The options are not as big as we would like them to be, and that's why showing a new way of doing things, a new dimension of cooperation, and presenting that, to open that discussion with a clear target. That's what we need. And that's exactly what's happening today, and that's why I'm so happy about that. Thank you. Johannes Dinghammer. Thank you so much. I just announced it even before. Now we are going to hear a high caliber guest that we welcome on the stage. Togo, we've heard about that country and spoke about this country quite a lot. Now we would like to welcome the ambassador of the Republic of Togo. So since 2017 he's been the ambassador, and since then he's been dealing with the relationships and the relations between the federal country of Germany and the Republic of Togo. And it's nice that he took time to get us closer to Africa. Komi Baitse Dago.
Einen kleinen Moment noch gedauert.
Yeah, it took a little moment because the mask had to be taken down, but now he's here. Welcome you cordially.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm present here for the books of Mr. Scholler for the dedication. Then I want to say that I'm very delighted to take part in this meeting of give and receive, to quote the first president of Senegal, the late Léopold Sédar Senghor. From the outset, I would like to welcome His Excellency Gerd Müller, Federal Minister of Economic Cooperation and Development, for his remarkable presence at this dedication ceremony, despite his multiple responsibilities and obligations. I highly appreciate this mark of attention. I seize this opportunity to express on behalf of the President of Togolese Republic, His Excellency Faure Essozimna Gnassingbé, the deepest and sincere gratitude of the government of Togo to the government of the Federal Republic of Germany for his support and his constantly renewed efforts for the development of Africa in general and of Togo in particular, both bilateral and multilateral, especially through G20, Compact with Africa, and the Marshall Plan for Africa. I continue my speech in French. Monsieur le ministre, distingués invités, dans quelques instants, nous suivrons la présentation du livre intitulé Africa First, coécrit par M. Martin Scholler, homme d'affaires, consul honoraire du Togo en Bavière, Saxe et Bad-Württemberg, et M. Daniel Schonwitz. Quel beau titre que de voir l'Afrique au cœur des préoccupations des Africains et de grands amis de l'Afrique, comme cela est si bien manifesté ce soir en ce lieu. Et quelle belle perspective s'offre à l'Afrique à travers ce titre. Africa First rappelle la volonté forte qui a marqué la période de lutte pour l'émancipation et l'indépendance du continent africain, menée par les pères fondateurs de l'Organisation de l'Unité africaine, devenue Union africaine. L'ouvrage qui nous réunit ce soir apparaît comme un plaidoyer pour la cause de l'Afrique, pour son développement. Il illustre la sensibilité et l'engagement de ses auteurs, M. Martin Scholler et Daniel Schonwitz, pour l'Afrique. Preuve en est qu'ils soutiennent l'accroissement de l'aide au développement de l'Afrique, à travers notamment Compact with Africa et le plan Marshall pour l'Afrique, en vue de réaliser le bien-être des populations africaines. Africa First se veut aussi une contribution importante à saluer et à verser au dossier des réflexions en cours sur l'intensification, la promotion et l'adaptation des relations de coopération entre l'Afrique et l'Europe aux exigences du monde actuel, dans l'intérêt bien compris des deux parties. Le Togo, dont la capitale Lomé a déjà donné 4 fois successivement son nom de 1975 à 2000 aux conventions ACP-UE, entend continuer d'apporter sa contribution à cette belle œuvre de coopération et de solidarité entre l'Afrique et l'Europe. Je vous remercie de votre bienveillante attention.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much to Komibai Dago for these words on our stage. So all speakers are going to take place here on our panel. Then you will be able to ask questions that you might have already. And after all the speakers have spoken, you can ask your questions to our gentleman here. And then we will have a little Q&A session later. Our next guest here on stage, since 2013, he's been a Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development. He himself is an author, so he knows what it means to present his book. So the current title is about rethinking, this questions of survival of humanity. And in this book, he also thinks about our dealings and our activities and what effect this has in the entire world. So many trips took him to Africa, and he saw the challenges, offered by this continent. He does know that it's going to be a century task to move Africa ahead, but it's also offering a chance of the century, and that there will be a century treaty between Europe and Africa in order to fight against poverty. Welcome, Gerd Müller. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa first. Dear Mr. Schiller, Mrs. Schiller, Mr. Excellency, dear Mr. Ambassador, despite Corona, ladies and gentlemen, or probably because of that, with all the regulations and rules. And, this event has been organized with all the rules. So I'm happy to be able to meet and, see each other and to be able to exchange ideas together. Johannes Singhammer, my friend, the former vice president of the parliament, introduced Afrika First in your book of Martin Schiller and Daniel Schönewitz. I was asked, in my capacity as minister, to say a few words in introduction to that. Africa and Europe, they are, a community of fate, So I would like to introduce you to in the book. And, that is, great potential, this, the new partnering country, the reform partnering country, a community of destiny. So we are obliged by history, to the people of Africa. Dear colleague, Mrs. Moderator, as a young woman today, today is the World Slave Day, and the media also have referred to that today.
An meinen Besuch in
And I remember my visit to Ghana at this slavery coast, where millions of slaves were shipped to the US. And thinking back, it's not been that long, in the 19th century, But even today, and that was the learning today. Even today, there are still 45 million modern slaves, but that's not our topic today. By history, we're obliged, based on our colonial history, today, we are challenged by humanitarian challenges in this corona time, because this virus hits the poorest of the poor the most, and many African countries are hit by their lockdown. A lockdown there needs to, a crisis of hunger and, food. There's a lack of food and medication. Yesterday was the World AIDS Day. We assume that simply because of the lack of medication, because of the lockdown, the delivery chains are interrupted. That means, unfortunately, 2 million people are going to die this year in Africa in additional. That they will die of AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis. Isn't that abominable?
und zusammen
Now we are asked economically, together successfully, Mr. Schöller, U.S. General Counsel in Togo, we are together successful. Now it's all about, to ensure the food, and Africa is a continent of youth, a dynamically growing youth. By 2050, the African continent is going to double in population. So the first question that comes up, can that continent nourish so many people and provide food? Yes, it can. This is possible to have a continent without famine, and by good cooperation. You referred to my questions, to my book, the survival questions of the humanity. The first question is nutrition and, food stuff. And the second question is, climate protection and environmental protection. So how many, human being can our planet cope with? And how can we, manage that this trailing development of the African continent? How can we provide utilities, making sure that, that our climate would not suffer from that? And we're greatly worried that currently Africa's future is still resting on, coal. And we in Germany and Europe, we're offering to make, a century leap, not to make Africa a black, continent like coal and oil, like the Ruhr region used to have, these big factories. But, with this technological cooperation, we can make this the crowning continent of renewable energy, hopefully. 2 hours ago, I spoke with the Moroccan Department of State. We can also do that with Togo, dear Mr. Ambassador. We signed today a cooperation
der ersten
for the building of the first and large-scale hydrogen production plant from the sun, the energy of Morocco, using technology from Germany to produce hydrogen. And of course, first of all, of American friends, but of course the perspective is also for Germany and for Europe. Africa, making Africa the green continent of renewable energies and to stand together economically. Mr. Schöller in his book, entitled a chapter that Africa needs social market economy. Yes, it does. But what does that mean? Social market economy means that to lead and making economy based on rules, good governance, which is the prerequisite for success and for development. Good governance means to provide legal security, ownership, and possession, and also that means the same rights for men and women, and that's definitely decisive. And it also means education, training, further education, taking one's own responsibility. That's key for the African countries. And Mr. Schöller is also referring to that. We don't have to tell the Africans how something should work, like the Agenda 1963 of the states and governments of Africa is starting to pave the way. But that also means that the social market economy is also addressed to us, Mr. Schöller, to act more fairly, to provide fair delivery chains, not to exploit human beings and nature. Externalization of the costs. I remember my visit in Nigeria, where I was declined Johannes Singhammer that I could go to the Niger Delta. The Niger Delta, you may all know that the dramatic contamination of oil, in the water, in the landscape, in the water. I wanted to see that, how big international multi-companies are, producing oil at the burden of human beings and the nature. And it's dramatic to see the traces it had left. And that's what I meant with externalization, ladies and gentlemen. When you go to the gas station here in Berlin, and if you want to fill up your gas, then you would believe that a drilling hole in the Niger Delta would have standards that it is complying to. It's the same as when you're buying a jeans in Germany. Then you also would assume that the supply chains happening, fair trade, fair conditions, social market economy. So you would rightly assume that the women in Ethiopia would no longer would be paid for 20 cents for 20 hours, and as it was in the 19th century, that that is exploitation of human beings and nature. Buying the jeans for 20 years and selling it for 100, and we can only change this together. This will make the development leaps possible, transfer together with the development countries to make progress. And that means social, ecological market economy, social basic principles. So no longer any neocolonialism that should be continued out of the 19th and 20th century, but instead to appreciate human beings, and every human being has the right to live a life in dignity. And that applies to the cooperation between the Europeans and African social economic market economy. And that requires investments. So with public funds alone, we won't make these quantum leaps anymore. We need fair trade and private investments. The African countries will set the legal framework, the right for ownership and legal security, and that makes the prerequisites for investments, that private money would be invested in energy and infrastructure. And I can only tell you, Africa is the growth continent of the future in many areas. Let me just call infrastructure of building. So within the next 10 years on the African continent, you might think of Berlin or Frankfurt, Germany, Europe. Within the next 10 years on the African continent, there will be as much construction as in Europe during the past 100 years. And Mr. Schöller also wrote that in his book and showed that. And then you know the dynamics when the growth potential that lies on this continent. And these are the chances that we can develop together. But currently, and I would like to say that at the end of my speech, at the moment, it's all about immediate aid, emergency aid, in order to tackle this dramatic corona pandemic that is, extending into, famine and economic pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, 15 billion, that's a huge figure, has been spent by the German government in Germany for short work. And that's why when it comes to, our labor market, it's, we have a lot of worries about this phase. 15 billion for short-time work. The European Union has spent 2,000 billion in order to support labor and cooperation in the European Union. 2,000 billion. So Europe has not invested into the support of the African society structure and in the fighting against the pandemic. No additional ones, apart from the running programs. So the German, Mr. Ambassador, we're moving forward here. And I'm happy that, from all the political parties, the German Parliament and the Minister of Finance has also, agreed on an immediate aid program. I spoke with Mr. Drossen from the Charité Clinic, and we established a special unit where we can provide help, support, science and research results in order to fight the pandemic can also be brought into the African country, because one thing is clear. We can only master the pandemic worldwide or not at all. That's why solidarity and cooperation will be key for a successful joint future. Thank you so much.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, Herr Müller. Lassen Sie das Mikro hier gerne liegen.
Thank you, Mr. Müller. Solidarity. You may also take a seat, because all the speakers are going to take place here, and then you can ask your questions. Africa is a green continent. Africa is a continent where renewable energy can be lived, and a continent where social market economy should be lived. And that's what Mr. Müller said. It's also can be found in the book Africa First, which are the thoughts the next speaker is going to share. Since 2012, he's been the main managing director of the Africa Association of the German Economy with 550 members. Now, with this association, this will give more companies the possibility to look at the chances of the content and to get a entry into the local economy. So how this is going to be done with the help of a big network with the contacts in Africa locally. And these contacts will be put together with German companies. Now he is connected virtually from Berlin to Berlin. Christoph Rangiete.
Ja. Schönen guten Abend.
Good evening. Dear Mr. Ambassador of Togo, dear Mr. Federal Minister, Mr. Müller, dear Mr. Vice President, Mr. Singhammer, dear Mr. Schöller, Mr. Schönwitz, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you so much, dear Mr. Schöller and Mr. Schönwitz, for inviting me tonight. And I look forward to the discussion, and I will look forward to the presentation of your book. Thanks to the previous speakers that mentioned already many interesting points in your book, Africa First. You both, Mr. Schöller, Mr. Schönwitz, look at important topics that we're also dealing with in our daily work. So for decades, actually, but that would be too exaggerated to say, but obviously, for quite some time we've been dealing with this topic. to look at the chances offered by the African continent for the German economy, but also the success stories have not been published enough, and they're not being heard in the broader population in Germany, and also in the German economy and German politics. Many African markets are definitely quite promising. The chance of creating a European-African economic region in partnership goes beyond of just making use of this chance. It's a chance for both continents of working in a new phase of globalization, where the political weights are shifted in order to maintain weight and or to gain weight in this respect. The precondition is, and we should make this happen, that the African continent in the end will come out of a winner of the current global crisis that Minister Müller mentioned and described with all the catastrophic events.
Die globalen Wertschöpfungsketten.
So with that, Africa has to be included into the value creation chains. You both authors write that, for example, this requires a change in the industrial trade politics with Africa, which is a change which also provides better access for African products to the European Union. And also Africa needs the social market economy you're writing in your book. And also for me, the social market economy provides orientation in my work, which has always been the case. There's a reason why the Konrad Adenauer Association that I was working for as General Secretary some years ago, and gave me a nice portrait of Ludwig Erhard that is now hanging in my office next to the African map. After working in that foundation, the principles and the ideas of social market economy are being, shown here and newly thought through in this ever-changing world. And looking at our Africa strategy, and there are a lot of aspects and ideas that are relevant for the economic cooperation with the African continent. What does social market economy mean for Africa? That's quite a diverse topic, and I'd like to focus on one aspect. Social market economy with regard to the African continent means that private economy, the entrepreneur, stands in the focus of attention, because entrepreneurs create work, wealth, social security, and progress by innovation. And entrepreneurial commitment by the German economy quite often is not coming logically. So competition with other quite subsidized activities and challenging framework conditions and the lack of infrastructure, but also the fragmentation of the African markets make it difficult for the smaller or bigger companies would need a certain support of the state. Social market economy at this point means that enables the companies and motivated to get active in African states. So, ladies and gentlemen, how can this be designed based on market economy? So the subsidy or the support instrument is a state guarantee. That is what would work best. Why would profit-oriented companies, why don't they go in big markets with great growth potentials, as we find it on the African continent for quite some time? That's the result of a risk assessment of the company itself, and also a risk assessment of the financing banks. With state guarantees, these risks could be reduced by, based on market conformity. The state would only come in and intervene if there is a risk. The company would be supported and also be protected against complete loss, total loss. And banks will be enabled to finance projects that seem to be more risky, as they would be possible to do without, state support guarantees. Germany and Europe should issue these guarantee instruments even further and referred and tailored for the needs of the companies that would like to bring capital and jobs to Africa. Some things have happened, but in order to move forward with that strong dynamics towards Africa, which is definitely desirable for the development, that would be needed more. So if we focus on the entrepreneurs, we should also keep the African entrepreneurs in mind. The biggest potential of them, or the biggest problem of the African entrepreneurs seems to be to get and finance, own growth at appropriate interest levels, and also the support from outside by countries or by state institutions like the IWF and also the World Bank, and this should be, a way that can be in line with the principles of the EU. So here, the entrepreneurs and the key figures can also unfold, and that's why Mr. Müller, the Fund African Grow is a good step that has been established by the federal government, and this should be followed by further concerted activities. Ladies and gentlemen, I would to close with this quote from Ludwig Erhard: "Being an optimist, you have more. He had seen more chances than risks." So he would see our idea of Africa, and he wrote in his book Wealth for Everyone, based on my opinion, the world is full of incredible chances if we would only use it. And that's what I wish to all of us, and thank you very much for your attention.
Vielen herzlichen Dank. Nach Berlin, Chancen nutzen.
Thank you very much to Berlin, chances and benefits. And Mr. Kangise, you stay tuned. Maybe we can connect you, because now we are filling these seats here.
Tollen Gäste, unsere Redner auf die Bühne zu bitten.
May I ask all our speakers, Mr. Gerd Müller, Johannes Singhammer, and Kumi Baitse-Dago, please come back to our stage.
Freie Platzwahl. Vielen herzlichen Dank. Take a seat, please. Thank you so much. Wir haben Fragen.
We've received questions to all of you, but also above all to Mr. Müller. I would like to start with one question by one author from Andy Skirrow. He's author from I Came in Blinds, who also deals with this topic quite a lot. And the question is,
Standing on its own if there wasn't outside interference. Herr Müller, vielleicht die Frage direkt an Sie.
Es ist die Voraussetzung.
that is the precondition. No, the step, of development aid is behind us. So we're bringing money. I mean, Africa is a big continent. Every country, every region, has to be looked at differently. That's important. But what is important, your own will of, looking at the structures in those countries, making sure that development is possible. I'd like to repeat that. So I also aligned the German development policy more strongly by starting with reforms, for example, in Togo, Namibia, but also in other states. The precondition is that, assuming own responsibility, the legal status and maintaining human rights, and, it's really important for the key for future development. And I think that's really important, to have equal rights for men and women, having access to ownership and power and capital. That may sound trivial to us, but in the 40s and 50s, that wasn't the case. But that is key. But investment into training and education and agriculture. So the Africans have it in their hands, and we want to support that, provide aid, and support by win-win situations in partnership on an eye level. And I mentioned the big fathers, the big areas, infrastructure and energy. These are the main fields. Thank you very much, Mr. Müller. I see we have another question from the same author.
Why not export this type of technology, for example, the judiciary system, transparency, independent institution, accountability? So, who feels responsible to answer that question? Maybe you.
Ich möchte nur voraussagen, Herr Bot.
I could also say, Mr. Ambassador, maybe you can say something on that question, because Togo is definitely, on the way to that. But Africa, of course, the African countries, of course, have to find their own way of doing things and have to go their own way. Togo is on such a way. That's why we're reaching out our hand for a special, reform partnership. The prerequisite for that, which has been done in this year, the prerequisite was, there were elections on a regional level and also on a federal level, and also the implementation of the rule of law and independent courts, which is a process that, works faster in one country, and in other countries it takes longer, if I may say today.
Sorge nach Äthiopien.
We are really worried about Ethiopia. We are worried about Uganda, Tanzania, Ivory Coast, where there were elections and where the majorities were not really accepted, and we may, fear rise in problems. Yes, Mr. Kannengießer. Maybe one comment from my side. First of all, I believe we should understand that good governance can be seen in many different ways in Europe and also in the so-called Western world. And our German model, and making it a role model for the entirety of Africa, I don't think that makes sense. Africans need to find their own ways of doing things in terms of how they organize themselves in governments. And we can offer a lot of support where that is needed. We can do that. So I think the political situations and the political aid is, going to many countries with supporting the creation of, structures and education-based structures. We're also supporting lawmaking processes. There's a lot of support that comes from here, but I believe it would be bold to say then we can say that, that we only can, provide our system. It would be pretty presumptuous. We should be aware that only a few decades that Berlin and Germany was, separated by a wall, and that we had a brutal dictatorship, 3 decades ago. And, the good governance, hasn't been that long prevailing in Europe, and I think we do have, the reason to support, but we should not to become the lecturer in the world and to teach people. Yes, Mr. Kannengießer. Another question which relates to all of you and everyone can answer, from Tina Adomako. Should we not stop to develop, to call it development aid or cooperation? Shouldn't we call it development obligation, for all the former colonial powers and for all the colonial states before? Yes, that is definitely a very interesting question, and I think, today showed, and those contributions showed, that we're not talking about a development and not about an obligation, but a cooperation, a cooperation on an honest eye level, That means that the strengths and chances of Europe and many African countries should be used. And so we should not talk about the superiors and the other inferiors. The other should develop and the others only receive development. No. So both we can learn from each other. Of course, we do have technical abilities in Germany and Europe, which, like scientific activities and abilities that we are willing to share. But there are so many ways and options where we can also relate to African sharing. And Mr. Ambassador, I would like to take the opportunity to take one example from Togo. The Togolese government, the president, last year, talked about the previous colonial palace and renovated the previous colonial palace for a completely new, purpose. Now they're showing contemporary Togolesian pieces of art there. So modern art in Togo is wonderful, I may say. And those who are interested for modern art, there's definitely no way around the African art. And, you have to go to Lomé and see it in Lomé. That's a true cooperation on eye level. And that's why we need, both strengths of both countries. We need even more. Yeah, cooperation on eye level, that was your words. I think we can all share these words. And quite often there's a topic that provides for a lot of discussion potential, but still the time is running away. That's why I would like to say thank you to all of you for this first part of the event. And so you can stay here with us and listen to our book presentation. Thank you very much to Gerd Müller, Johannes Singhammer, Nkomi Bayatsedago, and Christoph Kannengieser. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ja. Ja, manchmal ist das gar nicht so leicht mit der
Yeah, sometimes they don't get the translation, so that everyone is involved. That is too bad, because I was translating in English. But of course, there's going to be discussed a lot, and of course, we would like to do that in our second part.
Geht es die Buchpräsentation, den
Because now it's about the book presentation, Africa First, the book of Martin Schöller and Daniel Schönwitz. 2.5 years ago, they started of collecting ideas and writing down ideas, developing the book and the concept, and they started again and again, and how a book is being developed. There are three key messages, which is investments into infrastructure, cheaper financing, and more social standards, which has an influence on the population density. Daniel Schönwitz is economic editor, and he writes for Wirtschaftswoche for Spiegel Plus. Martin Schöller is CEO and co-founder of the Schöller Group. Until a short time ago, he was president of the Association of the Family Entrepreneurs in Bavaria. For many years, he's been supporting Africa, and that's definitely a heartfelt topic for him, and an initiator of the Desert Food Foundation and honorary consul of the Republic of Togo. Now we're going to speak with both of them. First of all, Martin Schöller, please come to the stage in order to give his welcome to you. Dear Mrs. Fleischhauer, thank you very much. Thank you to Mr. Müller and Minister Müller, and the really honest and serious words and being open for the dialogue. Our minister has a lot to do, that's why I can highly appreciate that. And he's also fighting for budgets, and maybe we can also make a contribution in terms of how we get more financing without burdening the taxpayers. We have similar ideas on the social standards, on the priorities, but also we are sharing additional ideas we'd like to express. Thank you, Mr. Kannengieser, for your support. You are the speaker of the German economy when it comes to relations with Africa. Many thanks to Johannes Singhammer for encouragement and orientation.
Supporting our initiative despite the restrictions and for the good cooperation. Thank you so much. Also, thank you very much, Mr. Blair, for taking time. We are now working together with the Blair Foundation on the Togo National Development Plan, and we're very impressed by your impact on African development. When wir
thinking of the refugees flocking in, then we know that the problem in Africa is also our problem. The extreme poverty is the reason. $1 per day, or even less than $1 per day, that is the majority of the Africans has to live off. United Nations have formulated the target in a greater consensus that the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030 should, the extreme poverty will be ended, and the 10 further of 17 targets are automatically terminated as a consequence if the extreme poverty is ended. When you be able to develop towards a middle income country, social market economy, as an integrated system based on the European approach. In our book, we call it the European economic model because, strangely, it is for social market economy. There's really no really good translation in English, so that's missing. In the whole of Africa, actually, social market economy avoids extreme poverty, and so that's a key for the solution. Communism is not a solution. Communism prohibits private initiatives for the fear that differences could develop, and the result being that poverty for everyone. You can see this in Northern Korea, in Cuba, and also really in depressing way as it used to be in Eastern Germany. Social market economy uses private initiatives and supports the weaker by solidarity. There's no better system in the world, and which is our first approach. That is something we would like to bring into discussion in our African thoughts. We do know that, but we're not using it consistently enough. And for example, we would have less trouble with globalization rejectors because if we say international cooperation is based on social and ecological standards, so that would, take away all their powers. Fair trade did not manage to get away and to move away the extreme poverty. We do need standards in our bilateral and multilateral agreements.
Pascal Lamy
also confirmed that to me, the former president of the World Trade Organization, that a change of paradigms is required away from the principle maximum freedom of trading and towards a more standard trade based on standards. We're on our way, but definitely far away from being there. Mr. Müller mentioned that the supply chain law, and this will also come in Switzerland, and it's being coordinated in Switzerland, the company liability law, and economies agreeing with that to be obliged. And as far as I know, entrepreneurs who are willing to take obligations, but this setting or relying on private economy, you cannot give it to the private economy only for the establishment of standards worldwide. This has to be done together with society and the politics, and here it has to be put into the right balance. And there's a lot that is happening, and many international agreements with regard to standards and social standards is made reference to the ILO standards, International Labour Organization. But we believe this is not enough. So specifically, a minimum wage is not being mentioned clearly. So we're saying that in our book. Mr. Müller said that as well. Market and rules brings wealth and peace. We do need a few rules where the market fails. Your one logic demand that a worker should be able to nourish his or her family, which in fact is definitely not the case, although it seems to be so natural for us. More than half of the African population lives from an income that is below their own cost of living, with the severe consequences that we know, as we know it from the media, all the way to the refugees. Hundreds of millions of people would love to move to, Europe. So this cannot be managed. What is on the positive side? China, 35 years ago, was as poor as Africa today. That is proof that it is possible to move out of greatest poverty and to move up to general wealth within one generation. And I need to show you one chart.
Was wichtig ist, Sie sehen hier das.
What is important to understand, the average Chinese monthly income. 11 years ago it was 250 euros per month, which is now 800 euros per month now. And like this income going up, 1-to-1, the gross national product grows per capita, but on the level of the simple worker who cannot negotiate because he's just a normal worker, this can only be done by what the Chinese call the orientation of the wage based on the standard of living in their region. That is one of our core demands that is not existing. We have the term, labor based on dignity, but not the orientation of the wage in line with the cost of living in the region. Currently, at the moment, it is 30 euros per month, 1 euro per day at the moment. And if we move forward, for the next 10 years towards $300 or euros, that's where the Chinese were 10 years ago, we would have achieved a lot. And that's what we're dealing with, because that would have a second important effect, because the population growth would stabilize. We've analyzed this, that by increasing income $1 per day, $10 per day, middle income countries, $100 per day, industrial countries, the number of children per woman is declining. And when you come to the line of 2 women per woman, then it stabilizes, the population stabilizes. That means we can also achieve 2 major benefits. If our support, infrastructure, contracts, everything we do, if that is linked with a policy of continuous, wages in line with the productivity that is also oriented by the cost of living.
Ein armes Land.
A poor country cannot afford infrastructure, and a country that is not having infrastructure stays a poor country. A poor country needs to pay high interest rates, and a country that pays a lot of interest, stays a poor country. At this point, we do see that the free market and the mechanism of the market do not live up to the needs of the people. That's why the country is in a vicious circle that it can't get out of. And we have many countries in sub-Sahara past the 10-20 years, despite all the good efforts. We saw them got stuck. And we're advertising that this mechanism has to be broken through, that we find a way without having to, send tax money to Africa, only by having our high solvability, that we can also get money at the financial market based on our creditworthiness from a lot of pension funds. So we get the money from 0 or 0.5%, and we can also take credits for 30 to 40 years, 50 years if we would take our big development banks for that. And if we can pass on that money, so Greece could have not been saved if we hadn't done that. That's one of our key messages of our book that we ask. Summarizing, first of all, we're saying much more needs to be invested into infrastructure than before. Otherwise, you can't create a certain minimum development and minimum requirement for the development of a company. 66% of all households in Africa are not connected to the utilities, to the electricity. So if entrepreneurs invest in Africa, in Asia, it's a matter of course. They would always find streets, roads, and electricity. So it's required to develop a program to help that many countries cannot start with the international competition. But we don't need to do this by donation. This can be done by financing. Africa can pay 6% interest, and that would be the limit. But if we offer finance of 2% interest, then there is a lot of air. That is the second point of our book. Financing concepts, using the market, don't use the taxpayer. And the positive circle would be, and the conclusion would be, if a country has less spent for capital, service and interest, then it would also increase its creditworthiness. So we can ensure ourselves that the country's creditworthiness goes up. That enables them to, stand alone without the European institutes and get to the markets. The third point of the book is we want to link our agreements with the social standards. Mr. Müller said that.
Bezahlung des einfachen Arbeiters.
But the point, payment of the simple worker, should be done at least in accordance with the cost of living in the region. That's what we'd like to, include more. I mean, we're not governing, but that's the discussion that we want to initiate. And the last one, I showed it here. So if we would be able to provide financing and combine it with infrastructure, with increased wages go up, and population gets stabilized, then in 10 to 15 years you could find a different Africa. Currently, the world believes Africa is doubling its population every 30 years, 2 billion, 4 billion, and for today's 1.2 billion, there's no good sufficient supply there for everyone. That means we would get into a much bigger problem if we don't fight poverty with the side effect of population growth. And, it's, then declining, because when you talk about slums and townships, where they all get into an own apartment, you don't have space for an endless number of children. So that, the child is, changing from a helper to responsibility. We also need to render proof, and Manfred Weber says the European way of life. We also need to render support and evidence that our, principle of freedom and wealth and peace works with that model, and that we should not talk about the pragmatic, fast, egoistic, totalitarian competition from the Silk Road would be, put at the side. Yeah, with the new Silk Road, countries and their treasures would be bought. China provided 1,400 billion for the Silk Road, and our complete commitment is 30 billion. We don't have to stand there amazed. We can do more, like we said before, without to burden the taxpayers. Our short version of our book is we need to keep more money for Africa, but from the market, and we need to link it with higher wages. that would be too complicated. But the book really deals this, why that works, how that works, and why this can go without taxes. And we all do that, and that's the end of my speech. And if we all do that, not only did Europe something good, it's not only about that, it's about, the joint benefit for both parties. Europe will also enjoy financial benefits. First of all, we're going to export more. We only export only 24 billion to Europe and 200 to Africa. We would have less refugee costs, and we don't have to make these high agricultural investments when the wages go up. And the subsidies are only there to compensate for the wage differences. So it's about philanthropy and help. We want to go to an economic logic, and we believe that Africa can also create a market of 2 billion people. It's in our time zone. That's a chance and a task for us.
Entscheidet mit über die
And the decision and the future of Africa decides for the future of Europe. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Martin Schöller, for this introduction into the thoughts of Africa First. So someone speaks with full of passion. And now it's also the second author, Daniel Schönitz. Welcome. I said before, for 2.5 years, it took to shape this idea, to bring it to paper. Mr. Schöller came to you and asked me, would you want to join the project? How long did he get you to persuade you? Oh, he was running into open doors, was economist, and that's why I've developed with development economy when I was studying, and social market economy. And that's why when Mr. Schöller asked me to become a sparring partner and to find someone who is able to write as well, he found a good partner. Social market economy, these were part of the various presentations. One key point also of the book Africa First. It's a system, a better system. There's no better system, you say. Why doesn't this system not exist yet in Africa? In the early capitalism, we also had bad conditions that you might call exploitation. And we fought hard by the dealing and speaking with the social democrats and the trade unions, and the power of own initiative is being praised, and that also finances the protection of the weakness. The Chinese came from another side. Okay, they said we have communism, everyone is being supported. Now we take private initiative. Now we're becoming richer, but we leave their support. So they capitalized communism, and we socialized capitalism, but pure capitalism will fail because the employers, the employees with no training, we have a lot, because an untrained employee is everyone who wants to earn some money in countries where you don't have any social protection, they'd be willing to work for any price. There will always be people who work for that, and the employer could be a pharma company, says, okay, get something to eat. Why should I pay for you? And if not, then you just leave. That means the negotiation power of the employee is a gap of the market. Theoretically, there's always an excess offer of employees, and since we came from the old time of having liberal capitalism, now this gap has kept staying in the southern hemisphere. There are many liberal theoretics who really like that and who wonder that the social market economy is so successful. So we have to close a theoretical and intellectual gap. So why that is necessary, why that is still a very good free market that fulfills the social standards. At this point, we have so many questions coming in, which
Was Sie vorgetragen haben,
is appreciation to what you've presented and what you've written. So many ideas, and so we can't get all the questions here, but I'm sure that you will deal with the questions later and will also answer those questions later. May I add, because you asked why hasn't Africa made that yet, or most countries not, Why don't we have social market economy there? One major point is that a huge initial financing, a trigger needs to be done. And we did not manage to do this after World War II. The Americans helped us. China also did this. They don't have social market economy, but their upswing was done with really a good infrastructure financing program. And it's exactly this initial trigger that is missing in Africa. And we believe that Europe could make sure that this happens. May I ask a question I can see about the tribe culture? This is an interesting question from Mr. Stefan Hess. So the impediments for your concept for the tribe culture in many territories. So what is the influence that religious convictions have in individual territories on your project? Yeah. I see 3 root causes that could disturb the peaceful life that might lead to aggression, that poverty, misuse of power, and radical convictions that are being pushed through by violence. There's still poverty, but there's no extreme poverty in Europe, and the misuse of power can also be kept small. And those who ask for violation will definitely not be heard. And that's all different in Africa. There's poverty, there's misuse of power, and there's radicality. And these are the impediments that are mentioned by Mr. Hesse. But once wealth is increasing, also in the Arab countries, so once wealth rises, one major factor goes away, and one driver of conflict goes away. Then we come in social market economy. We lead to rules. Rules make sure that there will not be power misuse. No social dumping, no environmental dumping, and no corruption for entrepreneurs. And that's why social market economy, limits the misuse of power. Then 2 of 3 problems are gone. Then still the religious part is still there. We also have peaceful religion, and we also have people in the religion that is deemed to be more aggressive. That we have people who say that this is not aggressive. How can the WTO rules be changed that help the industrial countries more than the African countries? And how can this be? This is getting technical, and so in the current political situation, I don't know whether the WTO would still be the right partner. With free trade, that was a bit exaggerated. Mr. Schöller mentioned that in the future, you not only talk about trade maximization in trade, it also needs to circle around the minimization of poverty. Trade should also be linked with social standards. So in the past few years, Europe made agreements, and which was a bit like Europe First, where we did not provide too many benefits for the African partners, and to support the industries and the industries. And so then we still, degraded them to be, raw material suppliers. So based on the bilateral agreements, we need to follow up on that. I don't think the WTO way is not the most promising one. I can support that. The World Trade Organization wanted to have one trade agreement, one size-fit-all agreement for the entire world. And also Trump said it's not possible. And also I spoke with Mr. Pascalami. There won't be the same rules between America and Europe and Africa. And now, I fully agree with you. Now we are in the time of bilateral, multilateral, relations, and but not the entire world. We can do this more targetedly. And I could write that. And we made a proposal of how the agreement could be amended. You can read that in our contract. That customs-free and financing agreements are linked, and by the fact that standards ABC could be complied with, it can be verified by a KfW, and if it's not complied with, then there will be sanctions. That was seriously getting standards and linked it with trade rules. Now, within the book, you mentioned the topic of cheap financing. We have another question from Irit Löschner, who asks So how should Germany get enthusiastic for international guarantees? We need it.
Wir brauchen es nicht. Da gibt es ein paar.
We don't need that. There are some political freedoms. The KfW Bank, our main institute for financing in the development countries, has a balance sheet total of 500 billion. It's not being put into the government debts. KfW also has capital and can also get refinanced with a good credit worthiness and pass it on. And these are not, debts of the legal carrier Germany. So if KfW wants to do this more, 30, 40, 50 billion with, in this long-term refinancing in the market with the pension funds, in Allianz, BlackRock, then the bank's rules say, as of a certain term, 20, 30, 40 years terms, Austria starting with a 100-year term, then we can calculate it like equity. So by those investments, the KfW can get their own equity and doesn't have to go to the German government anymore. Give me more equity. So that can be discussed with German experts. Mr. Riegling is also optimistic that it can also. Yeah, we do have events. This can be done with bankers and financial experts. We've discussed that. So what was the core message? How much conviction has to be done? Many of the ideas, have gone to those experts, and I think the low level of interest, this message is clear. The low interests are definitely a starting point in order to private capital, to mobilize it for Africa. It's the right time. We don't need taxpayers' money. We can mobilize private capital, and with our concept that goes towards guarantees, we would definitely give the African reform partners our creditworthiness in order to set up their own infrastructure. But Mr. Schöller, you said that it's not only important not to only use private capital, but also politics and economy needs to get closer. A private bank would never say, I'm lending money for 1% because I have such a good standing, and lend it to the Africans for 2%. Because you can get 7%. The private bank needs also to get the maximum what is possible. Now the government can say, okay, we can provide it with 1 and 2% margin and not 5%. This would help a lot. And something exciting happened. We had a closed round table about financing of Africa. Klaus Riegling was there half an hour and said this principle, that's how we used to save Greece, would also be the right principle for Africa. I think the discussion is running, and Mr. Hoyer von EIB knows that we're speaking. He is responsible for the European financial architecture. So we've reached a level where you're willing to differentiate, to do things and discuss between private entities and politicians. We have further questions. Stefan Tatzer from the Humboldt University. You're focusing on reform partnerships in Africa. So what are the countries that exist already, and which other candidates do you see? Yeah, we just heard. Togo is a new member. Yeah, Togo came in. Botswana is really a role model. And Senegal and Namibia. And Ethiopia. The north anyway. We'll talk about the center. The north is not that problematic. We talk about Sub-Sahara, and South Africa, which used to be quite successful. Now they came down a bit, but 80% is making, the business in South Africa. We're talking about the big block in the middle. Which other candidates do you see? Kenya, Tanzania, going towards the center. Congo, Gambia. That's a very specific question. We also need to observe the development. What is important, though, Africa is not it's not Africa. There's competition between the countries. The presidents meet, And they also, created the African Union, like European Union, and one said to the other, do that as well, then you get this financing. By competition, there will be a best practice, and something gets going. We only want to add two more elements: more money and higher wages. Best practice and governance, and he said it's not, it's quite aware of governance. One more question at the end, which focuses not on one country, but it's a rather general question. Corruption, question mark. Is that an ongoing topic? Where we're standing? It's definitely a huge problem, definitely important, but it's a problem that has been addressed a lot in the development cooperation. Some countries, Mr. Schöller mentioned, if you made a good progress, and so Mr. Müller, and with different reforms, the Marshall Plan of Africa, a lot of things happened. Anti-corruption authorities have been set up. And the second point, Mr. Schöller can add. We believe that specifically in the topic of infrastructure financing, we can use new methods in order to be more effective against corruption. Yes. Everyone knows this topic, and the foremost question, corruption in Africa, first of all, the population cannot be punished for that. And we're getting this in, we have the principle of know your customer in Europe. You cannot just open an account as a state governor. And, the banks were made policemen. No dubious company who exactly says who is the last final owner. Is this legally owned money? Banks are no longer responsible for, money laundering. Dubai might do that, but Europe is out. Then the IMF created the preconditions of, like the World Financial Police, that one country get finance, and they are checking that. It's not over yet. And what you mentioned, yes, we want to launch a small idea, which is a blockchain controlled contract management. In the blockchain, you can't change anything. And we have a European-African partnership that stands there. And only this way the money will be further, transferred, and whether they behaved correctly in a tender. And so technologically, you could also make progress. Mr. Schöller, you said it's not over yet. We're still on our way, but unfortunately, our event is over. And I think it's really showed that we have a lot of ideas that we can go further with, that we can talk about, and obviously people would like to ask questions more. We have a lot of more questions here, which definitely could be a good basis for the discussion, and which can also be discussed in the private framework. And also you can also make direct contact to those questions, so that the further questions, and now, and you're so full of passion, we take all the questions, we all ask them one after the other. One man, one word, all questions will be answered. We can't do this here, and that's why they're going to be answered. I thank you cordially, Daniel Schönwitz, Martin Schöller, for all the speakers who were here, Gerd Müller, Tony Blair, Johannes Singhammer, Komi Bayat-Setago, Christoph Kannengießer, and of course Peter Feyerabend and Günter Berg, and who made this possible. And thanks to all your contributions and ideas for the possibilities of discussing this year during the corona pandemic, and being able to make this event possible in order to express these important ideas. Thank you very much. Africa First. Here's the book. Further ideas, and it's written down everything in this wonderful book. Thank you very much for your attention, for spending almost 2 hours with us. Have a lovely evening, and best wishes from Berlin.
Danke.